Okay, Boker Tov, welcome back, everybody. So we're continuing Masechet Beitzah, Daf Yud Chet Amud Aleph. Let's maybe go back to the bottom of Yud Zayin. What we saw, we started discussing yesterday. We saw the Mishnah told us that there is no Tvilat Kelim on Yom Tov, right? The Mishnah said, according to Beit Hillel, at least, a person can do Tvilah on Yom Tov, but Kelim not. Right, everybody agrees that you cannot go into Tovel Kalim. Again, we're talking now about Tfilat Kalim mituma l'tahara. We're talking about Kalim could be Klei Ochel, could be clothes, could be all sorts of things. That is what we're dealing with. And we said that Tfilah cannot take place on Yom Tov. We said the Gemara is going to offer 4 different reasons as to why that is, why you cannot do Tfilat Kelim on Yom Tov. We started discussing the first one. It's quite a lengthy discussion here because we have the rationale, we have the reason that Rabbah gives, and then the Gemara presents about 5 challenges against that reason. So we got through, I think, the first one. Maybe we started seeing the second one. We'll see. We'll see it now. So the Gemara at the bottom of Daf Yud Zayin Amud Bet tells us the Kule Alma Mihat Kli b'Shabbat Lo. Right. Sorry, we're dealing with the guy over here. Yom Tov is going to be the same, but we're dealing with the case that you cannot tovel the kelim on Shabbat. Right. The case that the Mishnah spoke about was where Shabbat erev Yom Tov falls out on Shabbat, but we said that the tefillah cannot take place on Shabbat. Why is that? So again, some of the reasons will apply in Yom Tov, some won't. So why is that? So Maita Mama Rabba. So Rabba, the first reason he says Gzeira Shema Yedena Biado ve'Avirena Abamot Bereshut Harabim. Right, we're on to Daf Yud Chet already. So Rabba is concerned, as we mentioned yesterday, we have this concern throughout Shas. We have it by Lulav, we have it by Shofar, we have it by Megillah. The Rabba's worried you're going to come and you're going to carry things for Amot in Reshut Harabim. So Tosfot as well points out here and points out in other places also, what's going to happen first? That you're going to go for Amot in Reshut Harabim, or that you're going to come to carry from Reshut HaYachid to Reshut Harabim. So why are we not concerned that you're going to go from Reshut HaYachid to Reshut Harabim? Because generally speaking, you leave the door of your house or you leave the door of the building. So you realize that you're going from one place to another. But when you're just walking Abamot in Reshut Harabim, there's nothing there. There's nothing there to remind you. So that is the Gemara. So says Rabbi, you cannot bring your kelim for Tevilah on Shabbat because you might come and violate the issur of carrying. Right? So says Abaye, what are you going to say if the person has this bore in Chatzero, he has the mikveh inside his property? Sometimes you have, I remember there's a shop I'm sure there's others, but there's one shop I remember in London. It's an appliance store, utensils and all sorts of things. You go and they have a mikveh on premises. So you buy your kelim, whatever it is, and you toivel it there and then. Okay. So if you have the mikveh inside the Reshut HaYachid, so then there's no concern that you're going to go and carry it beyond in the Reshut HaRabim. So what's the problem? So we say no. We're concerned, right? There is no problem. It's correct, but it's a gzera because of if you're going to come to the toivel kelim in Yom Chatzero, you might come to toivel kelim in Reshut HaRabim, and then you might come to carry them. Interesting that over here the Gemara doesn't raise the question of why is this not a gzera, right? The Gemara just seems to accept it, and that's okay. We'll see the next case. We do ask the question. We're going to spend most of the next Amud dealing with this question of gzera. But on this issue, the Gemara does not ask about that. But then it says, right, so what about Yom Tov, right? We didn't make a distinction between Shabbat and Yom Tov in the Mishnah. We don't see any reason to decide that you're not allowed to toivel kelim on Shabbat, but you could on Yom Tov. But this rationale does not apply on Yom Tov. It says the Gemara, Shabbat, Yom Tov, I understand if you're saying it's because you can't carry it Abamot Bereshut Harabim. So I understand why you can't do that on Shabbat. I don't understand why you can't do that on Yom Tov. And the answer is Gazru Yom Tov atu Shabbat. Again, the Gezerah of Yom Tov is because of the Gezerah of Shabbat. You don't do it on Yom Tov because if you do it on Yom Tov, you might come to do it on Shabbat. If you come to do it on Shabbat, then you might come to carry. Right? So that is seemingly a Gezerah. So now the Gemara is going to address, and again, 5 different difficulties. If we say that when it comes to Tvilat Kelim on Yom Tov and on Shabbat, that we do hold gzera l'gzera, maybe because this is so likely, or maybe because this is so severe, or for whatever reason. This is one of those cases where the Chachamim decided that we are going to be gzera l'gzera. Well, if that's the case, you're going to have to back that up. Then you're going to have to find that there will be other gzerot which would also fit into this category, and that's what the Gemara is going to now discuss. So, says the Gemara, right? So we said, remember, Gazru Yom Tov Atu Shabbat. We make a Gzar of Yom Tov because of Shabbat. And now we say, Umi Gazrinan, is it correct that we make these kind of Gzeros? Right? Rashi again says, Umi Achmur Rabbanan Kulehai, where Rabbanan so stringent when it comes to Tfilat Kelim. Be'achtakanta to Tfilat Kelim, the Migzal Hetel Atu Isula, Ugzera Ligzera. Really, is it correct that you made Gzerat Ligzerot? Because let's see. The next case is from our Mishnah. V'hatnan. Well, we are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines from the top of the page. Yudchet Amud Aleph, end of the line. Hatnan. V'shavin shemashikin et hamayim b'kli even atalan, aval lo matpilin. Right. Remember, we saw in our Mishnah one of the cases we said. Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel agree. The case of hashaka. What is the case of hashaka? I take water which has become tameh and I have it inside my kli, and I bring that kli into the mikveh. And when the water that is inside the mikveh comes into contact with the water that's inside the kli, so all those waters are planted inside the mikveh, so to speak, and those waters become tahor. So that I'm allowed to do on Yom Tov. However, according to everybody, ein matpilin, I can't come along with a kli that is tameh and bring that into the mikveh. That's exactly what am I doing there? That's tfilat kelim. That's forbidden. So now says the Gemara like this. If it's correct our assumption that Rabbanan were machmir and that they made all sorts of gzerot in terms of tfilat kelim, well then you should say nigzol hashaka atu atpala. Then say, okay, the same way you said you can't be tovel kelim on Yom Tov because you might come to do it on Shabbat, because you might come to carry. Say the same thing here. So you can't do hashaka. Because if you do hashaka, you bring this water that's in a kli tahor, you might come to do atbala, you might come to bring it in a kli tameh. And if you're going to do that, what's the problem? Well, if you're going to do that, then you might come to carry your kli, abamot b'reshut rabim, right? Exactly the same thing. Just saying gzera ligzera. But we don't do that. We don't do that. Why not? He says, v'tizbara, it le'mayim yafim, hani lamali lemevalu hashaka. So it's like, well, look, if you have mayim yafim, if you have water which is tahor, which has not become tameh, you're not going to do hashaka in the first place. Okay? But it must be that the case over there, the only case where you do hashaka is the case where you don't have the water. Since you don't have, you're going to be very, very cautious that nothing is going to become tameh. Rashi explains that therefore this is a case which is very unlikely, and since it's a case which is unlikely, we don't make zerot. Now, Tosfot asks a question over here, right? Again, we are challenging the fact. We're saying, why don't we make a gzera l'gzera? Why don't we say hashaka to atbala? Have a look at the third Tosfot on the page. He says nigzol hashaka to atbala. He says kasher lifroch nigzol mishom shema yavirenu abamot b'reshut rabim lashikan. Right? There's a much simpler question that you could have asked, which is if the whole gzera comes from the fact of that we're worried that you're going to come and carry abamot b'reshut rabim. So ask, why don't you make hashaka asur in the first place? Because you're going to come and carry this water abamot b'reshut rabim. Right? Why don't we ask that question? So he says, Yesh lomar, the gabat balat kli tzarech lemigzar, shema yavileno. So when it comes to a kli, when it comes to everything there, we have to make the gezerah of shema yavileno. Why? Lefi shelahut lat bilo. Because person's very under pressure. They want to go and toivel their kelim. They're going to go the whole of Yom Tov without kelim. They can't do that. You can always find other water, and therefore it's not so. Again, it's not as likely a case, and that's why we don't make the gzera in that way. But in any event, so we see that is the case. So there's a scenario which is unlikely, and therefore that is not a proof one way or the other that we do make a gzera or not. So now the Gemara has a second kasha. So 80 vein. Okay, we're about 8 lines down, 8 to 10 lines down. Eitive. Madlin bidli tameh, v'hu tahor. Okay, here the case is, what is the challenge? The case is as follows. Let's say a person is drawing water. A person is drawing water from a well, right, with their bucket. And so you have a bucket which you're drawing water from. And that bucket itself is tameh. So if it goes into the water, it's going to become tahor. It's essentially the same. It's essentially the same as doing tefillah of the kli, of the dli. But that is allowed, right? The case is madlin bidli tameh. You're allowed to draw water with a bucket which is tameh. V'hu tahor, and it becomes tahor once it goes into the water. Says Rashi, bidli tameh v'hu tahor, me'elav, happens automatically. V'alo dami lematbil kli al gabei memav. He says this is not the same as bringing a kli and toivling in order that it should become tahor. De'asur dahatam kol atzmo lo ba'el taher bein mayim bein kli, because over there all you're doing is you're trying to make it tahor. Hilkach muchamilta the tefillah, and therefore it's clear and everybody can see and everybody knows that you're doing it for the sake of tefillah. V'tama the tefillah asura mishum dinarek metaken kli. And the reason why tefillah is forbidden is because it looks like it's similar to metaken kli. Metaken kli is probably an isod rabbanan. It's probably connected to the melacha of maybe of makeh b'patish or maybe of boneh, but you're fixing something that wasn't fixed before. Right? In other words, you couldn't use it because it was tamei. Now you can because it's tahor. That's why rabbanan said. It's interesting that Rashi mentions over here the reasoning of metaken kli, because right now we're in the terutz of Rabbah, who does not say that's the reason why you can't do toiveling on Shabbat. He says because shemaya virena. But in any event, it says vay michzi avahacha ena ko yodim shadli tameh v'harei omer lishov mayim alalu hayat tzarich. Over here, in our case, not everybody knows. It doesn't look like, it sounds like he's saying there's an issue of marit ayin, but there's no issue of marit ayin when it comes to drawing water, because it's not clear that the bucket was tamei in the first place, and people don't know, and people can't see that. They say, "What are you doing?" Nobody's going to think that you are trying to toivel your bucket. They're going to think that you're trying to draw water. So while you draw the water, and the bucket inadvertently gets toiveled as well, that's okay. That's fine. So that's what the Gemara says. It's madlin betli tameh v'hu tahor, and it becomes tahor. Now, here's our question. Again, very similar to the first question, very similar to the next few questions that are going to follow. He says, "V'ita." If it's true, what's true? If it's true that we are going to make zera l'gzera when it comes to toivel kelim on Shabbat and Yom Tov, ita nigzo dil ma'ati latbule beinei. Right. In other words, we're saying you can go and draw the water because you're not actually toiveling the kli by itself. But why don't we make a gzera? Why don't we say you can't draw the water in a kli tameh? Because if you draw the water, you might come to toivel the kli. What's the problem if you toivel the kli? Well, if you toivel the kli, then you might come to carry it arba amot b'reshut rabim. Again, it's the gzera. But we don't make that gzera, right? So seemingly that's a proof that we don't go so far. So says the Gemara, no, in that case you can't prove from there. Why? Shani hatam mitoch shelo utra lo ela al yedei dilio zachuru. Right. The point is that Chachamim didn't make a gzera over there because they did. When do Chachamim need to make a gzera? Chachamim need to make a gzera when it's very likely and it's very possible that I'm going to go from action A to action B. That's the whole point of the gzera. Right? Don't do A, because if you do A, you might come and do B. But if when I do A, there is something built in that is going to stop me from doing B, there's no need for a gzera. So what would if there's a certain heker, a person remembers, a person knows, I'm not doing it in the normal way. It's not that I'm going and toiveling thing. I'm only allowed to put this bucket into the water because I'm drawing out the water. So therefore, a person's going to remember, a person's going to know, if I'm not drawing water, then I can't toivel the kli. Okay, so they could have made a gzera, and they may make a gzera in other places, but not here because there's that way of remembering. There's that heker, right? That's what the Gemara says. It's shani hatam. The only way you can actually bring this bucket into the water is by drawing water out, not just by toiveling itself. Therefore, zachuro. Therefore, you're going to remember, and you're not going to come to transgress. Okay, so that was case number 2. Case number 3. Okay, maybe from here we'll see seemingly that we don't make these gzeros. Itvei, we challenge as follows. Kli shenitma me'erev Yom Tov, ein matbilin oto b'Yom Tov. B'Yom Tov, matbilin oto b'Yom Tov. Okay, so here, what's the case? You have a kli, which becomes tamei on erev Yom Tov. Rashi points out, we're going to get into shortly a discussion about avatuma, vladatuma, different levels, different stringencies of tuma. But yeah, we're talking about avatuma. We'll see later on why Rashi needs to say that. But the kli became tamei on erev Yom Tov. Ein matbilin oto b'Yom Tov. You cannot toivel it on Yom Tov. Why? Because you could have gone to the mikveh before Yom Tov came in. This, by the way, is a principle we find throughout Melechet Ochel Nefesh. We've spoken about it before in the Masechet, that any melacha which you could have done before Yom Tov, so you have to do it before Yom Tov. You can't come along and do it on Yom Tov. That's one of the reasons. That's one of the distinctions we saw. Not every Melechet Ochel Nefesh on Yom Tov is allowed, but not every melacha that's associated with food preparation is allowed. Certain melachot, right, plowing and planting and harvesting, etc., which are connected to food preparation, but they was nonetheless forbidden on Yom Tov. Whereas things like cooking and kneading and sorting and sifting, etc., which are also through food preparation, but those are melechet ochel nefesh, which we do allow on Yom Tov. So there are many answers given and many distinctions brought in the Rishonim, but one of them is that anything which could have been done before Yom Tov, you have to do before Yom Tov. And generally speaking, those melachot which are done for a long time, those are not done immediately. In terms of food preparation, those should be done before. Those things which can't be done before, you're allowed to do on Yom Tov. So then the question comes out, okay, so nowadays you can cook, and the fact is many people do cook, do all their cooking before Yom Tov. Now we have refrigeration and all sorts of things. Do we still have a heter to cook on Yom Tov? So the answer is we do, because they say intrinsically it's not the same, right? Freshly cooked food, everybody knows that freshly cooked schnitzels are not the same as schnitzels that you cooked a day before and you heat it up on the platter, right? So therefore, there is still a qualitative difference in terms of doing it then. It's not that, right, you couldn't do it to the same degree, the same quality before Yom Tov, and therefore, but if I have a food which actually gets better, which is the example that the post can bring, I think, is through the compound and things like that, whereby it would be better to make the food earlier in advance. So then you would have to make that before rather than on Yom Tov itself. Okay, but in any event, so there are discussions about that. But so what are we saying over here? We said if the kli nitma erev Yom Tov, the kli became tamei before Yom Tov, so then you have to toivel it then. You can't do it on Yom Tov. Be Yom Tov, matbilin oto be Yom Tov. However, if your kli became tamei on Yom Tov itself, so then you can go and you can. This is one exception. You can toivel it on Yom Tov itself. Why? Because what are you meant to do? There's no way. Everything was ready for Yom Tov, right? And all of a sudden now my kelim, I've got nothing to eat with because my kelim became tamei. So on Yom Tov I can go and I can toivel them. So what's the question? You all know the question before we even read it. If we're saying that when it comes to Tvilat Kelim on Yom Tov, we're going to make a gzera, so you should make a gzera. You should say gzera of Yom Tov to erev Yom Tov, right? Just like if you're going to say now that you can toivel the kelim when they became tamei on Yom Tov, well, what's going to happen? People are going to come to be toivel the kelim when they became tamei on erev Yom Tov. What's the problem if you're going to toivel the kelim which became tamei on erev Yom Tov? Well, then you're going to toivel the kelim on Shabbat, and then you're going to toivel, and then you're going to carry Abba Matur Shutarabim, right? That's the whole thing. So it's interesting. So yeah, you could have said, theoretically, we could have given an answer, which is, we don't say gzera li. But that's not what the Gemara says. Maybe the reason the Gemara doesn't say that maybe that's why Tosfot said earlier. Do you remember Tosfot, the second Tosfot on the page? So it says, gzerat Yom Tov atu Shabbat. He says, lo ave gzera li gzera. The Yom Tov Shabbat achat gzera. Right? Tosfot says, Yom Tov and Shabbos is the same thing. So here, based on that logic, it would only be a gzera li gzera. I.e., the gzera would be, don't toivel kelim that were tamei on, that became tamei on Yom Tov, because then you might come to toivel kelim which were tamei on erev Yom Tov, and therefore, and so what's the problem? Because then you're toiveling kelim on Shabbat or Yom Tov, it's all the same thing, and then you might come to be la'avir abba mot bershut rabim. Okay, so it's just one gzera li gzera. But nonetheless, the fact is we don't say that gzera. But so says the Gemara, Emi, Tanigzo the Yom Tov, Atu the Erev Yom Tov. If it's true that you're saying that we do make Zerot when it comes to Tvilat Kalim, so why don't we say that even if it became Tameh on Yom Tov, we can't tovel it because you might come to tovel the Kalim which became Tameh on Erev Yom Tov. So says the Gemara, no, this case is different. This case is different. But Tuma B'Yom Tov Milta de Shchichai. We've already said one of the principles is Chazal don't make zerot for things which are unlikely. It's exceedingly unlikely that your kelim are going to come to be tamei on Yom Tov itself. Why? Because before Yom Tov, everything became tahor. Right? Before Yom Tov, you went and you made sure the person was tahor and the kelim were tahor, etc. So for Yom Tov, the tfilat, the tumah take place on Yom Tov. That is unlikely, and therefore we don't have to make a gezerah about it. Okay. Challenge number 4. Well, we said, okay, we don't make a gzera there. Challenge number 4. Itve. Kli shenitma be'av hatuma, ein matbilin oto b'yom tov. Bevlad hatuma, matbilin oto b'yom tov. Okay, so we have different levels of tum'ah, right? Essentially, the way that it works is that the tumah, the source of the tumah. So we have a met, a human corpse, which is avi avota tumah. That is a special exception. But then you have other things where it comes to ava tumah, right? You have a nevela, a sheretz, different things, and something which comes into essentially whenever something comes into contact with something which expends that tumah, so then that will take on a lower level of tumah. So something that came into contact with an ava tumah becomes a rishon tumah. Something that came into contact with a rishon tumah becomes a sheni tumah and shlishi, etc. But as we go down the levels of stringency, so we find we're not concerned for everything when it comes to truma, right? So then truma can become rishon tumah, sheni tumah, can even those lower levels of tumah can affect it. When it comes to chulin, we aren't going to be concerned. Chulin is only going to become tamei from an ava tumah and not from a vlad hatumah. Vlad tumah means not to distinguish from the ava tumah, which is the highest level. Again, the exception of the med, which is avi avota tumah. But you have the ava tumah, and then anything below rishon, sheni, shlishi, that is called a vlad hatumah. So essentially, says the Gemara like this. We say if a kli became tamei with av hatuma, so ein matbilin oto b'yom tov, then that is av hatuma is tuma min Torah. Says Rashi, kevan de tamei min Torah ve'eleke metaken. That is like metaken, and therefore it's not. Therefore you can't do that tefillah yom tov. However, if it was only bivlad hatuma, so then we say matbilin oto b'yom tov. Says Rashi, bivlad hatuma ein kan tikun the midoraita on a Torah level. The only issur is if it became tamei from avatuma, not from bladatuma. And again, Chachamim were only stringent here regarding certain types of things that we're concerned about bladatuma. So when it comes to chulin, we're not worried about it. When it comes to truma, we are concerned. So the question is going to be very similar to the question we asked before. If it's true that we make all these gzerot, so then we'd say, don't come to be toivel something which was tamei with vladatuma, because then you might come to toivel something which is avatuma, the same problem, right? V'imita nigzol ha'atuha. So the answer here says the Gemara says no. Vladatuma hechi mishkachat le. Where are we concerned about vladatuma? We're concerned about it gabei kohanim, right? Because it's going to affect truma and the like, and that's something only kohanim can eat. It's like kohanim's rezinim. Kohanim's rezina, right? That's a principle we have for our Shas. We say the Kohanim are very, very careful. The Kohanim are going to be very vigilant and scrupulous not to come into contact with Tamei, and therefore, similar to what we said before, maybe it's an unlikely. Rashi says it's a milta de lo shchicha. There's an unlikely case, and therefore we don't have to worry. We don't have to make gzerot about it. Okay, one final challenge on this point. Is as follows: Tashma. Tamar Avchia bar Ashi Amarav Nida she'ena begadim maremet v'tovelet bivgadea. Okay, so if you have a case of a woman who's a nida and she doesn't have any clothes, literally because everything is tamei, so it's now on Yom Tov. We said again, remember, kelim is not just kelim that we eat from, but kelim is our clothes as well. So you can't toivel kelim on you can't toivel kelim on Yom Tov. We said a person can toivel, that's no problem. But the kelim is. So what do we do? So in this case, we say ma'aremet v'tovelet bivgadeh. Ma'aremet, meaning this is a harama, meaning it's a right. You're doing something which is kind of a legal loophole, right? Harama. But tovelet bivgadeh, generally speaking, you can't go and do tefillah in one's clothes. But here we say because she doesn't have any clothes, we can't go and tovel the clothes by themselves, but she can go into the mikveh with her clothes as well. Now you ask the question. Generally speaking, we say that you can't go into the mikveh with clothes. That would be a chatzitza. So it must be that we're talking about very loose-fitting clothes, and therefore that would be possible. But the question which the Gemara asks is, Im ita nigzo dilma ati lat bule be'enayu. Right? If we're saying you make gzera, so say a person cannot go and nida cannot go and toivel with the clothes as well, because then she's going to come to toivel the clothes by themselves. So again, shani hatam, it's different over here. Mitoch shelo hutra la'ele al-yedei malbush. The only way you're allowed to toivel the clothes is by wearing them, and therefore you're going to remember zchorai. You're going to remember that you can't toivel them by themselves. Okay, so bottom line is, those are the 5 cases, the 5 challenges which the Gemara brought. Again, how did we get to this? We started off with a question of, are we allowed to toivel kelim on Yom Tov, on Shabbat and Yom Tov? And the answer was no, we are not. Okay. However, we said reason number 1 why you cannot, which is Rabbah. Rabbah said we're concerned that you might come to carry the Arba Amot Bereshut Rabim. Okay, you might come to carry Arba Amot Bereshut Rabim. I understand that's a problem on Shabbat, but on Yom Tov it's not a problem. So we say no. We make a gzera on Yom Tov because of Shabbat. I.e., we see that we are gozer gzera in this realm of Tfilat Kelim. So if that's true, there's all sorts of other cases where we have restrictions on Tfilat Kelim. We brought 5 examples. And if we can't find in any of those cases that we make a gzera, maybe the principle does not apply. So we went through all 5 cases and we said each of those 5 cases is an exception. In each of those 5 cases, there's a reason why I don't need to make that gzera, either because it's a milta de lo shchicha, it's an unlikely scenario, or because there's something built in that's going to remind me not to do it. But we've not rejected the principle that we are machmer, we could theoretically make these gzerot ligzerot. Okay, so at Khan, that is the reasoning of Rabbah. The Gemara is now going to go through a few different answers as to why this is. Let's just read the answer of Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says, we're about the bottom third of the page now. Yud Chet Amud Aleph, gone through quite a lot today. Rav Yosef Amar, Gzera mishum schita. Rav Yosef says, no, the reason why you cannot toivel kelim on Yom Tov is because you might come to squeeze them, you might come to squeeze out the water. Again, if kelim is just talking about plates and pots and pans, it's hard to understand. But as we said, kelim includes clothes as well. So you can't toivel them because of schita. What's the issue of schita? By the way, so there's no melacha called schita. It's one of the most well-known melachot that's not a melacha. Everybody knows you can't do schita on Yom Tov, right? Squeezing out the clothes on Shabbat. But schita is not a melacha. So there is a machloket rishonim. Is schita part of the melacha of melaben, of laundering, or is it part of the melacha of dash, of threshing? And there would be nafka mina between the two opinions. But so that is the second reason that the Gemara gives. Why? We're going to challenge a little bit, we'll answer it, and then we'll see reason number 3 and 4. But our time is up for today, so that we'll have to wait until next week. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Chodesh tov.
Thank you very much.
Chodesh tov.
Chodesh tov ושבת שלום.